Hi everyone, this week we are exploring the witches in Macbeth, but we're taking a closer investigation on the use of the visions and hallucinations throughout the play. The witches play such a crucial role in the progression of Macbeth's character, and this is just one sort of lens we can look at today. Now, as I mentioned in last week's video, to gain a really good understanding on Shakespeare's intentions, we have to look at what life was like when Shakespeare was writing his plays. And in the time that Shakespeare lived, it's really important to understand that this society was massively suspicious and paranoid about the presence of witchcraft. They believed that witches posed a real and perceptible threat in society, and this idea was supported and exacerbated by King James I himself, as he obsessed over the possibility that witches had had some power over his reign. For instance, when he went to go and meet his wife, or his wife was trying to sail over to meet him, both times the ships were caught in storms, and any association to thunderstorms and shipwrecks was really associated with witchcraft. So he felt like there were women in society, because obviously witchcraft was mostly associated with women. He felt like they were trying to undermine his reign. Okay, and obviously, as we know, he wrote his own book called Demonology. It's also really important to remember that during the Jacobean era, explanations for unusual or phenomenal events such as storms, dangerous weather, disease were unexplained. Okay, and the only way to explain these serious events was by associating the supernatural elements to them. Almost anything that went wrong in society was often blamed on witches, with innocent women being scapegoated and punished for these supposed crimes. And to delve a little bit deeper, perhaps another inspiration for Shakespeare to include witches within this play was Greek mythology. Greek mythology was really rich with the belief in witchcraft, and the most infamous of these were called the Fates or the Moirai, which I have commented on before in a previous video. The role of the Fates in mythology was to assign individual destinies to mortals at the moment of their birth, okay? And there were three of them. And their power was believed to be so great that their decisions could not be overruled by Zeus, who is the god of all gods. And the witches in Macbeth have a similar impact on our tragic hero, okay, because they use their power to heavily influence him into causing both chaos and then obviously his eventual demise. So not only were Jacobeans suspicious of witchcraft and the supernatural, but they also had this really strong belief that witches were thought to have been women who had made pacts with the devil. Now, in a highly religious society, this would have been absolutely abhorrent. And the Western beliefs around witchcraft largely stemmed from the Bible, and in particular the teachings of the Old Testament. And it's written that thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, which basically means that all witches should be killed. And this verse in the Bible gave rise to the fear that society held for the supernatural, and therefore led to the persecution of women who were accused of witchcraft. The fact that the church officially recognised witchcraft as being sinful therefore meant that it led to the systematic witch hunting that occurred during the Jacobean era. And this systematic witch hunt was also spearheaded by King James I himself. He was a prolific witch hunter because of his obsession with witches, and as I mentioned before, he even wrote a book on them, and it was called Demonology. Now, we are going to investigate the presence of hallucinations in the play, but it would also be remiss of me not to mention Act 1, Scene 1. Okay, Shakespeare purposefully opens the play in the media res as the witches are revealed to be immediately conniving and dangerous. And witches only collude under the cover of darkness in this play, which is shown obviously when they arrange to meet ere the set of the sun, which means that they will meet once the sun has set and gone down. Automatically, we can infer that this darkness is associated with hell and the devil, but also it reveals the witch's desire to maintain that secrecy and reinforces their conniving nature. And Shakespeare further intensifies the dangerous nature of witchcraft because he describes their ability to hover through the fog and the filthy air. Here, Shakespeare's hinting at the true power of the witches and their meddling. And we've got this idea that Lady Macbeth requests thick night to cover her sinful deeds, just like the witches who use the fog to hide their ability to corrupt others. And this ability to corrupt the minds of humans is revealed when both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth attempt to utilise the darkness for themselves. So if you watch back my video on the motif of darkness, we can investigate this a little bit more. But after Macbeth has delivered the prophecies he requests for stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires, and Shakespeare is clearly associating light with values of honesty, virtue and integrity, but values which Macbeth is so keen to strip himself of as his terrible deeds begin to mount. Okay? And in this moment in the play, all it is the thought of committing regicide. But again, Macbeth is rejecting ideas of morality in order to achieve his ambition. And in order to achieve this ambition, Macbeth is mimicking the actions of the witches because he's requesting for darkness, and it suggests that their power, the witches' power, extends to being able to manipulate perhaps Macbeth's thoughts and actions. And as I mentioned before, the corruption of the witches doesn't stop at Macbeth's character, but we see Lady Macbeth also request the assistance of the supernatural, and she's mimicking Macbeth's desire for darkness as she also attempts to use the supernatural to her advantage and propel her ambitions to see her husband Macbeth become king. And perhaps most importantly, we need to look at Shakespeare's intentions, thinking about the contextual knowledge that we've already gained. So Shakespeare is really keen to warn the audience of the dangers of this supernatural soliciting, but also he wants to reveal how this association with witches instantly corrupts the souls, okay, of these characters, but therefore obviously in real life to humans. And in the play, Shakespeare's showing that the characters, once they have communicated with the witches, they are immediately willing to shed their morality in order to succeed their ambition, which therefore shows us how truly dangerous witches are. Okay, so the next few minutes we're going to explore the witches and the hallucinations that are present in the play. Now, you may look at the quotation on this screen and think, that's not really a hallucination. But the hallucinations in the play, no matter how small they are closely linked to the supernatural and obviously the witches. And here, although it's not necessarily a hallucination but more of a thought, we can infer that this thought has close associations to the witches due to the influence of their prophecies on Macbeth. And as the play progresses, these thoughts accelerate into hallucinations and therefore increases Macbeth's mental instability. And it's this mental instability that's really useful for the witches, as for a Jacobean audience, the witches' sole purpose is to cause chaos, death, and destruction. Now, in this moment when Macbeth says, whose horrid image doth unfix my hair and make my seated heart knock at my ribs, which I will always tell you when I come across my favourite quotations, and this is genuinely one of them, What we see here is Shakespeare's using Macbeth's regicidal thoughts to warn the audience of this danger, the dangers of supernatural soliciting. He's emphasising the dangers of submitting to the temptation of the devil, as Macbeth is so eager to put this horrid image of regicide into motion. And not only this, the reference to this image could also demonstrate how inextricably linked Macbeth is with the witches now. Okay, now he has received those prophecies. Because from here and to the rest of the play, Macbeth experiences a series of hallucinations within the play, and this horrid image could be Shakespeare's first indication that the witches use Macbeth's innate savagery to their advantage. Okay, they understand Macbeth, and they, as we have witnessed as an audience, because we are told through the captain's words that he has unseamed from the knave to the chaps. He's Valor's minion, and his blade smoked with bloody execution. And although initially some inferences could show that actually Macbeth originally, before the corruption of the witches, was loyal, valiant, and honourable, as he is fighting to protect Scotland on behalf of King Duncan. But what we can see is that real brutality that Macbeth has demonstrated is a real key sort of characteristic that the witches are keen to exploit in the play. And if we dive just a little bit deeper into this quotation, we can analyse it at word level. So we could look at the adjective horrid, which reveals that Macbeth recognises the sinful nature of the regicidal thoughts. The fact that this thought unfixes his hair and makes his heart knock, it reveals that Macbeth is perturbed and disturbed by these thoughts of regicide, and this physical reaction he's having intensifies the anxiety that he is currently feeling. And as we know from our contextual knowledge, committing regicide is a direct act against God. So it would be unsurprising for an audience for Macbeth's feelings to be really disturbed at this thought. The next quotation we're looking at is taken from perhaps Shakespeare's most famous of the soliloquies, and this is the moment before Macbeth commits this immoral act of regicide, and he is hallucinating or imagining a dagger before him that is leading him to the path of destruction. And this dagger could be interpreted as being either a figment of his imagination or as a hallucination sent by the witches. Okay, it's certainly a product of his stressed and disturbed mind, as we have seen in the previous quotation, that the mere thoughts of regicide and undergoing this immoral action is really unsettling him. But this is a hurdle that Macbeth must overcome to acquire the throne. And as we know, Macbeth has this real desire to become king, and the audience are watching and witnessing Macbeth grapple with the morality behind his ambitions. We could look at this idea that the image of the dagger is encouraging Macbeth towards his destination. And here Shakespeare is demonstrating Macbeth's ability to be manipulated and controlled. Therefore, we are seeing a weakness of character, which perhaps is Shakespeare giving the audience a direct warning of the consequences of communicating with the supernatural. An originally depicted strong, brave warrior is now being reduced on stage to confusion and mental instability. And as the audience watch Macbeth struggle with the thoughts of regicide and putting that regicide into motion, we could argue that maybe, due to this uncertainty, Shakespeare uses the witches to take advantage of Macbeth's mental decline, but also offer up a path for Macbeth to follow through the dagger as he feels compelled to follow it, and therefore complete his ambitions, and in turn the witch's prophecy and their conniving and meddling behaviour. The next quotation we're looking at is taken from the moment where Macbeth sees and witnesses Banquo's ghost. And this is where Shakespeare is showing an audience the extremes of Macbeth's mental decline, okay? Because the previous quotation was in the privacy of his own thoughts and he's the only person on the stage. Whereas here, Macbeth is in front of all of the thanes at a celebratory dinner to mark his coronation as king, which therefore intensifies how far Macbeth's mental decline has increased. Now, we need to think about this idea of context, because we need to look at sort of why has Shakespeare included the presence of a ghost on stage. Now, we've got to remember, and you've got to think about, link it back to last video where we looked at the context and the religion that was sort of conflicted in the Jacobean era. England at Shakespeare's time of writing were Protestant, okay, under Queen Elizabeth, and then this was extended by King James I. And therefore, Protestants believed that ghosts were apparitions sent from hell, and they were there to seduce people into committing crimes. And this idea is further supported by King James I in his book Demonology, as he himself suggested that ghosts were not the spirits of just dead men, but they were manifestations of the devil. Now, this interpretation is really compelling when we examine through the lens of Shakespeare's desire to ingratiate himself with King James I. So what we can see is Shakespeare's using Macbeth's reaction to Banquo's ghost to prove to the audience that his action of regicide has been caused through that immoral soliciting with the supernatural, and therefore his communications with the devil. And again, we see the connection between Macbeth and the witches, because the appearance of Banquo's ghost spurs Macbeth on to revisit them, okay? So the ghost acts as a catalyst to Macbeth's later mental decline, but also his brutal and his savage nature. We see here that Shakespeare's cleverly revealing to his audience the true power that the witches hold over Macbeth, with sort of demeaning Macbeth's grip on the throne and therefore reality. And Macbeth's reaction to the sight of Banquo's ghost reveals the fear and guilt he feels towards his action of regicide and Banquo's murder. And I really love the reference to earth, let the earth hide thee, because it indicates that Macbeth is continuing to rely on that darkness to cover up his sinister deeds. So here Shakespeare's proving that Macbeth and the witches are inextricably linked. And finally, we're going to look at Shakespeare's presentation of the fourth hallucinations that Macbeth is shown by the witches. Now, first of all, we've got that connection between this moment where Macbeth is requesting from the witches to reveal whether he should fear Banquo's lineage, okay? And we've got that connection between the thunder, between here and Act 1, Scene 1. Now, the use of the pathetic fallacy is Shakespeare intensifying the witches' sinister intentions, and it also reminds the audience that the witches are powerful and therefore should be feared. As I mentioned earlier, as the play progresses, the hallucinations and the way the witches are playing on Macbeth's greatest and deepest fears accelerates, okay, and it gets worse as the play progresses. And this third apparition is really interesting to look at, because what we've got here is Shakespeare using two of Macbeth's greatest fears in order to reveal sort of his mental decline. So the first one that we're going to look at is the fact that we've got a child that is crowned. So the reference to the child of this apparition and the second apparition is also a vision of a bloody child, highlights the witch's desire to torment Macbeth, but could also act as a reminder of Macbeth's own brutality through his attempted murder of Fleance and the murder of Macduff's son that's yet to happen. And Shakespeare's cleverly reminding the audience of the extent Macbeth is willing to go to shed any morality he has, okay? The fact that he attempted to murder Banquo's son, and the fact that he goes on to order the murder of Macduff's son, just shows how far removed he is from any integrity as a person. The second of Macbeth's greatest fears that we see and investigate within the play is this idea that Macbeth is terrified of losing grip on the throne. And the fact that Shakespeare has shown Macbeth a child that is crowned, it's an additional reminder that Macbeth's grip on the throne is unstable, and another way in which the witches control and manipulate Macbeth. And Shakespeare's using these moments again to reinforce to the audience the true dangers of witchcraft, and therefore to support King James I's quest to persecute these so-called witches. And through the presentation of the witches, Shakespeare's proving that the supernatural are inherently evil, as not only do they play on Macbeth's greatest fears, but Shakespeare's hinting that that is what would happen in society if you associated yourself with witches. Now, throughout the play, Macbeth is haunted by the reality that he does not have an heir to the throne. And this hallucination, this apparition, is that final reminder of Macbeth's sort of limited time on the throne, but also his lack of chances of extending his lineage. So that's it for this week's video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and it's really important just to remember the connection that the witches have with Macbeth throughout the play is Shakespeare's way of warning the audience of the dangers and the consequences of association with the supernatural. See you next week, guys.